Hi everyone. So today I'm going to continue my Explain Correctly series by talking about the ENTP versus the INFP. So in this pairing, we see again the same number of similarities and differences as with every other pairing. Let's focus first on what they have in common. So if you look first for Jungian dichotomies, ENTP and INFP share two Jungian dichotomies. That is that they're both intuitive and they're both irrational or perceiving, you could say. So that means, first of all, they both lean in their strengths towards the abstract, different ideas, what is possible, what is not possible, what is simply not here. And that is really their focus, what's not here. They are both imaginative types, visionary types. They're both types which see things which are not necessarily practical, not necessarily grounded in reality, but there is something there which is abstract, which they grasp and see quite clearly. So that's one thing. And again, because they're irrational, that intuition is their leading function. They're both, first and foremost, guided by the sense of what could be or will be. There's this idea that there is something which is not here right now, but that thing which is not here right now is the need, is the objective, is the thing to guide everything else that we're doing in the pursuit of that thing which is not here. So in that way, the ENTP and INFP are similar in their Jungian dichotomies. Other ways in which they're similar, they both share, in terms of their values, first of all, being determined. Now, being determined is not necessarily a good thing that they both share being determined, because depending on the differences in values, they can be at loggerheads with each other on this particular thing. Now, they are determined in terms of, again, their intuition, because it is because they're intuitive, so they're strong at intuition, and because they're rational, so their intuition is basically setting the need and sensation, but it's not strong, so it's not doing it as much. Because intuition is setting the need and is strong, it also becomes stubborn. So they're both stubborn in their intuition. So they take views on what will happen, what could possibly happen, what was not yet in the happening, and they cannot be persuaded by others on that in terms of what is possible versus not possible. Now, it happens to be that they differ on this, but I'll talk about that later. The point is they're both stubborn on what is possible and not possible, and won't be convinced otherwise on that. But it does mean that also both the ENTP and the INFP can be quite easily convinced on what is immediately around them. Both of them yield to things changing in their immediate physical surroundings, and don't stake a claim to being ones to control their immediate physical circumstances. So yeah, that's another way that they're similar. They're similar also by being clarity seeking. This is half of their values, beside by clarity seeking. Now what that means is that when they use the other side, the more rational side, the ethics and the logic, they share the same values around that. So they share a valuing of introverted logic and a valuing of extroverted ethics, which means that for both of them, they like to, from being led by whatever sense of what will eventually be, they want to really understand that in a logically coherent and consistent way. They're trying to get to a grasping of the underlying truth of things, the underlying way in which things fit together. It makes sense, it's not contradictory. They want to draw that into clarity for people. And that matches with extroverted ethics. Both these types are also interested in how people are likely to react to them, how they are coming across to others, in what ways they can affect the emotional states of others by also delivering aspects of the logical truth, you could say. This also leads me to site-locked. Site-locked, in other words, these are types where there are symmetries around extroverted thinking and introverted feeling, In the case of the ILE, they are very good at extroverted thinking, extrovert logic, and very poor at introverted feeling, introverted ethics. And the IEI is the other way around. They're very good at introverted ethics, but they're very poor at extroverted logic. Nevertheless, they both share this middling use of extroverted ethics and introverted logic, which means both the ENTP and the INFP work on both sides in terms of their extroverted ethics, their ability to elicit emotional states in others, and introverted logic, their ability to make sense of things coherently and consistently, to set out a framework or theory, an explanation of how things fit together. So both of them engage in that space. Both of them are theoretical and also people engaging, while, as I said, being led by a sense of what is not immediately there and being quite stubborn on what that not immediately there is or will be or could possibly be. So these things coming together, you can see why these become quite similar types in some ways. You would expect to find them both involved in either new or certainly very promising intellectual movements because of these things coming together. This idea of the abstract, of explaining and understanding and communicating on the abstract to other people. Both of these types are going to be doing that and find themselves doing that quite a lot. How else are they similar? Well, they're both affirmers, or as we call positivist in sort of more traditional Raynian dichotomies. They're both affirmers. They're both setting out, you could say, a proposition of something being the case. Very, very vague. If I were to add some more detail to that, in the case of ENTP, they are affirming the goodness of things. They are trying to include more into the scope of what is accepted. They're trying to say, yes, this is great, this is great, this is great. Let's add these other things in. Why not? So they're affirming this sort of sense of yes towards all things. The INFP is not quite like that. Their affirming is more about a consistency of said and consistency and certainty of said truth. So their affirming is that this is the the truest of truths. This is the underlying truth behind all things. There's no doubting. There's no skepticism towards that. Once they found that truth, that is the truth. And it's almost an article of faith when it comes to the INFP about this. So one's proposing, as it were, to why not include more things? Why not get more things going? Why not say yes to the world? And the INFP is saying yes instead to a grasping of, an appreciation of the truth behind the universe, you could say. But both of them affirming types. They are also, and this is the last one they have in common, they're both antithetic. What has typically been called asking types. Antithetic, I think, because the idea is that within their respective quadras, the ENTP in the alpha quadra, the INFP in the beta quadra, they're both going on a sort of journey and change internal to themselves. They don't immediately align to the direction of their quadra, the alpha quadra being one of sort of bringing everything together in harmony, and the beta quadra in terms of exacting external world change. They don't necessarily even both immediately align to it. When the ENTP starts out, they're actually quite maverick and eccentric and sort of socially outcast. And they start to have to go through a journey of them bringing their ideas and insights to a community and being accepted by that community. The INFP, they start out in the more sort of, deeper, personal, reflective focus, far more about thinking on their soul, the sort of navel gazing and how they feel about things and how they relate to others. That is where they start out, the INFP. It's only later, once they've developed their ideas, developed their true ideology, their way of thinking, they start to think, right, I can now start to impact upon the world in some sort of real concrete way with my way of thinking. It takes a while for INFP to get to that point where they're confident enough setting out their thinking to impact upon the world. And even when they do, it's less about impacting everything. They'll find their select group and circles of people who they feel they can sort of influence and impact upon in, say, their writing, other ways of expressing themselves. It could be in art, could be in religion, philosophy, whatever it is. So both go through that journey of change in order to align to the natural direction of their respective quadras. So those ways in which they're the same. How are they different? What are the dichotomies that they differ on? Well, the first one, the ENTP is an energizer. You could say an extrovert. It is breadth oriented. It is about increasing the amount of something, and the INFP is about reducing the amount of something. They are an integrator or introvert or introtim. So yeah, keep in mind that because they both lead with a kind of intuition, given one's the extrovert, one's the introvert, that means that one leads with the extroverted intuition, the other leads with the introverted intuition. Hence, some of the main differences. And I'll just add to that if we travel it further down. Well, let's talk very quickly about one being a logician and being an ethicist. One is strong at logic. The other one is weak at logic and strong at ethics. So the ENTP is far better at sort of assimilating new facts, new information, applying it, making sense of it very quickly. And the INFP is far better at relating to people and finding ways of appearing to others in the right kind of way, of managing their reputation over the long run and sort of knowing how to say the right thing in the right moment to the right person to elicit the right effect. INFP is far better at that and managing their relationships over time towards that effect. Okay, but yes, as I said, the intuition is different, the extrovert intuition and the introvert intuition. This is also found in the fact that one is world accepting and the other one's world rejecting. This goes back to their values again. The ENTP values extroverted intuition and introverted sensing, and the INFP values introverted intuition and extroverted sensing. So again, we see these differences in values. Essentially, the ENTP is looking to explore the various different possibilities available to them. They're expanding the range of what is possible. And that's because they are determined, they're very stubborn in setting out what is possible and saying, this is how the many different things can be. They won't be convinced to narrow the scope of possibility beyond what they have already said is possible. The INFP, on the other hand, they're not looking to expand the possible. They're stubbornly towards introverted intuition. So for them, it's all about reducing the possible to a sense of certainty of how things will be. It's not even a sense of probability for an INFP, actually, even more so than, say, an INTP. An INFP is very much, I believe this will happen. I know it. I just know it. And it's that just knowing that guides the INFP. In the same way that the hint of a potential of a new idea, a new way of thinking about things, and an alternative way of framing everything is what appeals to the ENTP. Other things, I can talk about reductivist versus holist. So the ENTP is reductivist, the INFP is holist. What does this mean? It's another word for sort of static and dynamic. See, ENTP, they see their possibilities as many disparate things. This possibility, this possibility, this possibility, this possibility. Each one is different and separate from each other. And so the ENTP has a sort of being an energizer, being rational, and being a reductivist is a sort of rapid switching between different focuses of interest. Whereas an INFP, being an integrator, so it's more narrowed down again, but still being irrational, but also being a holist, it's more of a gradual reflective process that they go through in narrowing down the possibilities to this one true outcome, as it were. And the outcome is sort of the flow of events from the past through to the future. Where is that going? And the INFP spending a lot of time reflecting on that and turning it over in their head, imagining and wandering in their imagination to discover and uncover the deeper truth down the surface. It's very fluid. It's like the idea they're appearing into the deepest, darkest pools of water to draw things out. So this is why it's more holistic. There are no clear distinctions between this and between this and between this. It is more the truest truth, as it were, is holistic in its nature. It ties it all together. It converges in on that thing of significance and meaning. And that significant path or journey, it's not necessarily distinct. It is something which is taken as a whole in its nature, hence holistic. So yeah, you'll find the INFP is not the rapid switcher, but more of a sort of slow, gradual reflector. Yeah, so another way in which they are different. I said that the ENTP is logical and the INFP is ethical, but also the ENTP, where they are stubborn in terms of ethics and logic, they are stubborn in the part which they are weak in. So the ENTP is stubborn in their ethics, but strong and quite flexible in their logic. They're weak and stubborn in their ethics, strong and flexible in their logic. The INFP is the other way around. It's a very good way to tell them apart. The INFP is strong and flexible in their ethics by being obstinate, but they are weak and quite fragile and stiff, stubborn in their logic. What does this mean? This means that while the ENTP is very able to quickly assimilate new information, learn from new facts, update their knowledge structures to make sense of everything around them, and very, very quick explainers, the INFP is far more rigid in that respect. It takes a long time for them to change their mind on things, if they ever change their mind on things. They can be sort of person you can throw lots of facts at, and they won't assimilate those facts into their propositions like you never talked to them in the first place. It makes them very quietly stubborn in their viewpoint, even quite ideological, and not adapting their ideologies to the facts that are presented. At the same time, because it's quite weak, there's a certain fragility there. INFPs do not like to potentially look stupid in other people. They're not the sorts of types that get up in front of everyone and has to answer questions on the fly. They would much rather prepare a speech or address they have to make, if they have to do that at all. Really, they're not necessarily the public speakers. If they do become public speakers, they can be very good orators, but it's prepared. They're not a type that can quickly chop and change their viewpoint in the moment with new facts, new information, hard, challenging questions being thrown at them at that particular time. They don't have that kind of logical flexibility. It is very fixed. And it's fixed towards the introverted logic and not the extroverted logic, which is why they can be so anti-practical, anti-empirical. Very much about the theory, very much about the faith, the credo, the belief structure that is their attempt to put together an underlying absolute truth of reality. If you flip it around, the ENTP, right, is so while the INFP is very strong at ethics, right, they are very good and masterful at blending a sense of how they're coming across, their reputation over the long term. They blend that with very good instinct for their personal one-to-one relationships and how they feel towards others and the inner nature and character of people. So they're very good at ingratiating themselves with different people, larger in the one-to-one. They work best in the one-to-one, building up that friendship, building up that trust, whatever it is. They establish that closeness and intimacy over time, quite subtly. Very sort of, they can be very approachable people, INFP, even though they're not actually that accepting internally, be very critical. On the outside, they look very accommodating and very approachable, very diplomatic. So it's very easy for them to build these one-to-one relationships with others. And then working on the one-to-one, they're very good at influencing, affecting people's emotions, convincing people very indirectly to do things so that it feels like they really wanted it in the first place. If he's very good at sort of getting people to do things without, appearing to be arguing or debating or trying to push or force anything on anyone. They are masters at subtlety in that way. And this comes from that very strong, very flexible use of both the focus on the one-to-one relationship and the more sort of and the expression of their mood, their emotions to elicit feelings in others, which can operate better over the group. But despite that, the ENTP has no such skill. They are weak at ethics and they are stubborn at ethics, hence it is obstinate, and they are logical rather than ethical. So that means that the ENTP, they are very fixated on their extroverted ethics because they are, let's say, clarity-seeking extrovert ethics. That's preferred. So the ENTP is very much a sort of attention-seeking, slightly buffoonish individual who's focused on, eliciting positive responses in other people. They want to be admired. They want to be liked by others. They want to come across well to others. They want people to react positively to them, and they can be a bit of a junkie for that. But in doing that, they lose track of the introverted ethics. If they ever had that in the first place, they're not very aware of their personal one-to-one attitudes. Even when they are, they really struggle to admit said one-to-one personal attitudes, and they often suppress that in their own actions because they don't have a logical reason for why they should be doing things. So what this means is that the ENTP can suffer from a lack of stable one-to-one relationships in their lives, even while they pursue a sort of more public popularity. And sometimes that hollowness in their private lives can almost get in the way of them leaving that positive impression in the public sphere, cause them to actually come across as sort of untrustworthy or lacking sort of appropriate values or sincerity or all the rest. It can create that buffoon effect where they just go over the top in their extroverted ethics and lack that sort of dignity which comes with a more effective application of charisma. So yeah, those are ways in which they are different. If I also look at another way, one is time locked, the other one is space locked. The ENTP is space locked. As I've said before, they are a type that their extremities are in very strong extroverted intuition and very weak introverted sensing. So they're very much about, the many different possibilities and what else could possibly be thought about. And they're not very good at sort of the noting to the day-to-day, being grounded in the present, appreciating the immediate experience for its quality and seeing those details. They're not good at that. But they can balance a mix of the more sort of strategic long-term imagination and the more tactical immediate action. The INFP, no, they can't balance that. Their asymmetry, because they are time-locked, is towards introverted intuition and away from extroverted sensation. So they're very much, pretty much entirely strategic with no tactical capability. They're not good at taking quick action unless they're sort of forced to by certain pressure. Without that, they just get stuck in their heads and not really confident in being able to then take that action and move things forward. They'll be very, very cautious in moving forward at all until they've thought it all out in terms of where it's going. So this means that they're not good at the extroverted sensation, even though they're very good at the introverted intuition. They're able to just know and see where things are going. However, they can balance, unlike the ENTP, that sort of more broad, ideational, thinking outside the box, considering different possibilities side when they have to. But also they can balance that with a good eye for the detail and the day-to-day and how the sort of minutiae can be harmonized, even though they don't particularly like doing it. Another thing, the ENTP is an identifier and the INFP is a transformer. I've talked a bit about these sort of differences in values, alpha and beta here. The alphas, like the ENTP, they're identifiers. It's about their position in relation to everything else, in relation to society in general. So for them, specifically for an ENTP, which is clarity-seeking, world accepting, that position they want relative to everything else is to be harmonized and entangled up with everything else, for everything to be brought together into a peaceful harmony. For the INFP, that's not the axis they're considering. Their axis, because they're transformer types, is one of change, specifically the locus of change. And the INFP is focused on an external locus of change, or making and shaping and changing the world. INFP is quite a bit, very far actually, to the point where they don't easily relate to the idea of taking responsibility for developing your competence at solving things. They're more likely to assess the world structure itself, what the system is, whatever that is, and how essentially that is a system which is against me or could be, causing things to be that I can't succeed in my environment. It's difficult for an INFP to relate to the idea, no, I need to take on new things, take on these skills, develop my skills, improve my characteristics so I can actually succeed at the end of the day. They're far more likely to think, I'm not the one to change. I need to find a way to very indirectly and sort of strategically and politically change the world for me to inhabit it. But yes, this focus on change, regardless of the locus of change, is something you find with the transformers, which are the betas and the deltas. The final dichotomy I'm going to talk about is clockwise versus anti-clockwise. So the idea here is that clockwise types, they're kind of, through their actions, they move aspects of society forwards in some way. There is a natural progression from their contribution to the next type's contribution and the next type's contribution, sort of a circular rolling forward motion. And for the ENTP, we've talked a bit about this, how the ENTP takes the logic, sort of the factual know-how, and through their key focus on new possibilities, new ways of thinking, and wanting to communicate that to others, they get people excited about the new ideas, about the new ways things can be done. And that then leads to change, because the development of new innovative techniques, which people are excited about, want to talk about, so it gets given the support to be developed, and so things roll forwards. For the INFP, they're anti-clockwise. So for them, their movement is from, well, introverted ethics to introverted intuition to introverted logic. This is a progression which, well, it's coming from, from their focus on personal one-to-one relationships towards the deeper recesses of their reflections and where things are, and then coming out with some kind of structure to make sense of everything. It is something which often gets very caught up in itself. The INFP's nature is to really end up navel-gazing. It is the Zarathustra, the prophet-like figure who goes up the mountain and then never quite comes down from the mountain. It can often be. Whereas the ENTP is sort of coming up with lots of different ideas and opportunities, and by being helped by the ISFP, by sort of being made, which makes their ideas more palatable, more likely to work with people. The INFP, really it becomes a sort of reflection on where things will go, what is the underlying truth of stuff. That can sort of guide the ESTP figure in sort of breaking and smashing things in the present moment. And they're guiding, in a way, sort of a long-term strategic diplomacy. That side really just makes the ESTP a bit more sustainable in what they're doing. But it isn't really taking things forward. If anything, it's moving from, well, the sort of the sense of personal attitudes towards the more abstract, and then towards the logic. It ratchets back, it ratchets back the abstract to the more logical. And that more logical side, that structure, how things fit together, it doesn't have that sense of really moving forwards. If anything, it just gets sort of caught up in the ideas, gets caught up in the philosophy, gets caught up in the underlying theory, which, can be useful in some ways, but also detaches things from more practical reality. It doesn't then create that sort of need for the next step. It gets complicated. But what we find for INFPs is they aren't necessarily the one that puts in the next thing which takes things forward. Instead, they end up setting out some kind of idea, which often is less connected to a practical reality, and can then almost lead to a sort of decadence in the society. Not the decadence of, not decadence of necessarily being sort of licentious and sort of sexual, but more in terms of, we now find a truth which is now not really according to our practical factual reality, and we stick to that, and we don't necessarily move forwards with that. There's some good, we see this in actually some religions which weren't able to adapt to empirical sciences. They got caught up in their philosophical reflections, and then they also came to a standstill in that respect. So these are reasons why the INFP is more of an anti-clockwise type rather than the clockwise type. And when they are balanced with the ESTP dual, it's not that they then suddenly are able to enact the change to move things forward. Instead, it becomes a question of the INFP making what the ESTP does be less, not so sort of breaking or destructive that it upsets everyone and the ESTP gets restrained in what they're doing. And then instead, it creates a more longer term image side so they can smash up bad ideas and sort of bad systems more effectively. Anyway, I hope that helps everyone in understanding the INFP. Again, when it gets to the clockwise, anti-clockwise does get a bit more complicated. I hope that helped. Anyway, thank you everyone for tuning in, and all the best.